If I was giving this talk 7 or even 5 years ago, the image that I likely would have selected to set the mood would have been of someone having sleep apnea. It would have been an overweight, middle-aged male snoring away in his easy chair with a TV blaring in the corner. Today, however, if you Google images of tired people, this is a demographic that's starting to emerge. It's also the demographic that we're, for the first time, starting to see at our sleep clinics. I find it actually quite ironic that from the day we're born till the day that we die, we sleep or we strive for sleep each and every day. But most of us actually know very little about sleep, and in particular, our own sleep. Sleep is actually considered one of the 3 core elements of fundamental health. Fitness and nutrition are the other 2. I love to use the image of a 3-legged stool to help emphasize the importance of having all 3 of these core elements not only present, but very strong. So if you've ever sat on a 3-legged stool, if one's broken or weak or not there, the stool falls over. So these 3 fundamentals are really quite important. They also have something else in common, and that is how changes in our society over the last 100 years have had such a significant impact on all 3 of those. And I'll explain. My dad was a farmer all his life, and he'd be 103 years old if he was still living. And through his activities of daily living and his activities of making a living, he never had to work out a single day in his life, but I can reassure you that he was as fit as a fiddle. My older brother now runs and operates the family farm, and as you can see, mechanization has really changed his industry, as it has mechanization changed many professions over the last 100 years. And it's had a significant effect on fitness. So my brother now has expensive running shoes, he's got a treadmill, he's got a stationary bike, and he's very intentional about finding time to exercise in order to maintain his fitness. So how did that actually come to be? Well, in 1964, Nike entered our lives, and through educational marketing, they began to help us understand the importance of exercise. They provided us the runners and the motivation to do it, and over a relatively short period of time, without much help from the healthcare system, they actually created a revolution worldwide in causing people to be intentional about their fitness. Nutrition has actually followed a fairly similar course. It used to be that the pathway from the garden or from the pasture was really direct to the kitchen table. As a result of that, the food was fresh, tasty, really nutritious, and a lot of work to produce. But all that changed as society changed. As double-income families and our economy changed, so did the availability of processed food. And we seem to have bought in hook, line, and sinker to the advertising that was presented to us that this processed food, not only was it easy to prepare, it was tasty and nutritional. Although it started really as a slow grassroots movement, pretty similar to fitness, we've now started to see people be very intentional about the food that they're selecting. They're prepared to spend more money for it, and they're now feeding their families more intentionally. So what about that 3rd leg of the stool? Well, 100 years ago, before there was electricity in our houses, people tended to go to sleep when it got dark. And then quite literally, with the flick of a switch, our rooms and our houses were lit up like never before, and time in bed and sleep took a significant hit. And as if that wasn't bad enough, we had our technology and our entertainment crawl into bed with many of us. And certainly, sleep time got affected, but maybe for the first time, our sleep quality started to be impacted. Sleep, in comparison to fitness and nutrition, has a significant disadvantage, and that is how the heck can you sleep and be conscious of how well you slept at the same time? The comparison to fitness is actually pretty stark. So you know when you exercised or when you didn't exercise. You know how long you exercised for. You likely knew how hard you exercised. Excuse me. And then with the addition of wearable technology into the fitness world, we now have technology that can actually plan the fitness. It can remind us to work out. It can track our steps. And really now the cause and effect of exercise is really quite measurable. However, we don't yet have really good technology that can help a person measure sleep. You can't really change your behavior and actually understand how that's impacted your sleep. Going forward, I'm determined to have the kind of impact on society's sleep quality that Nike's had on fitness. So let's get an understanding of just how big a problem poor sleep is. If we look at the literature of just what we call clinically defined sleep disorders, sleep apnea and chronic insomnia impact almost 20% of the adult population. And 80 to 85% of those people are undiagnosed, as in they're not at a sleep lab yet to actually understand they even have the disorder. And none of these numbers actually take into account tired young men and women who are really struggling with their work, their family, and their career, and still trying to achieve a good night's sleep. The only known way to be able to measure sleep is by analyzing the brain activity while you're in bed using technology called EEG technology. The only known show in town right now that can do that would be the Provincial Sleep Lab. Well, Manitoba has about 1.2 million people that crawl into bed every night hoping to get a good restorative sleep, whereas we only have 10 sleep lab beds that could ever assist you in understanding what your sleep quality was like. I'm probably going to disappoint some of you today that have gone out and bought devices to wear in your wrist to be able to assess and track your sleep. But measuring sleep through the movement of your arm is a primitive surrogate to being able to measure the activity of the brain while you sleep. Although this is a cartoon, it's actually a very accurate depiction of what goes on in a sleep lab. Of all the sensors that are connected to this poor fellow, the electrodes that are attached to his head are the ones that are actually able to report on whether the person is awake or asleep or in the various stages of sleep, including REM sleep. Throughout the night, the data is collected, and in the morning, it's analyzed by a specially trained technician called a polysomnographer. This is a 30-second segment of what we call raw EEG data. And using a set of EEG scoring rules, it's that technician's job to determine what stage of sleep this would be in. Now, sleep actually comes in 4 stages. There's stage 1, which is considered light sleep, stage 2 and 3, which is considered deeper, more restorative sleep, and the 4th stage is REM sleep. You probably know it as the dream stage. Through the course of an average night, the technician would have between 800 and 900 of these segments to evaluate. And fundamental to the rules is that at least 16 seconds, or the majority of the 30 seconds, has to be one stage of sleep in order to be able to score it as that. Can you imagine the level of concentration required to sit and do that 800 and 900 times? It takes a human about an hour and a half to 2 hours to actually get the complete result. So the technician's job is then to print out a summary report for a sleep specialist to then look at. It's generally 4 or 5 pages of data that looks very similar to that. Now, this report includes multiple indices that all have different units of measure, and thus you really need to have that specialty in order to be able to assess and compare to really then evaluate what the person's overall sleep quality was like. After they're done that evaluation, they prepare what's called an interpretation, and the patient then goes and has a consultation with the sleep specialist. Now, if you're lucky in Canada, that process from the start to finish might take 2 months. But if you happen to live in some provinces where the availability of sleep lab isn't very good, it could take up to a year. Now, that healthcare process for people that have sleep disorders like narcolepsy or periodic limb movement or might suffer from night terrors would be appropriate. But I would argue that the average young professional who's trying to understand how stress or maybe behaviors like drinking coffee or wine in the evening impact their sleep quality, that's not a system that they're going to be prepared to live with. So we really do need to come up with a new solution. This is a bridge this is a photograph of a bridge taken in the Honduras just days before Hurricane Mitch ravaged that entire country. It's also the only bridge out of 150 bridges that was left standing after the hurricane ripped through. And it was built, designed, engineered by Japanese engineers, and for a time it was a pride of Japanese engineering. This is a photograph of the same bridge taken just days after the hurricane had ended. Notice how the river has widened and completely shifted, making the high-quality bridge essentially ineffective for its intended purpose, which was transporting people and vehicles. The problem of poor sleep in our society is growing to the point where it's almost being considered a public health problem. However, we haven't yet moved the bridge or built a new bridge, so to speak, to address the problem and to provide people the tools that they need in order to become intentional about improving their sleep. It really is a system that needs to get fixed. Dr. Magdi Yunus is a Winnipeg doctor that I have the honor and pleasure of working with. He is clinically trained in two specialties, respirology and sleep, but his real passion is in research and using science to solve prevalent real-world problems. As one of Canada's most respected researchers over the last 40 years, he has a number of tremendous innovations that have had a huge impact on healthcare throughout the world. But I would argue that his most impactful work is really yet to come. And that will come from his current research and future innovations in helping us understand and improve sleep. When you're doing research, one of the most important pieces of it is being able to ensure the accuracy and consistency in reporting on the outcomes. And one of Dr. Yunus's frustrations in doing sleep research was the inconsistency that could occur in scoring the EEG data. So to solve this problem, he set out to develop a computer program that could automate the process of scoring the raw EEG data. And it was a massive undertaking. It took him 4 years to perfect it, but it is now the only auto sleep scoring system that's been validated at arm's length by academic institutions such as Harvard, Stanford, and the University of Pennsylvania. And this software, in comparison to a human score, could take up to 2 hours to score a sleep study, can now do it with accuracy and consistency in 2 to 3 minutes. Dr. Yunus then took his research one step further. Having had to analyze literally thousands upon thousands upon thousands of EEG signals, he began to understand that there was a better way to get a truer measure of the depth of sleep. Now, to explain the algorithm that he developed to be able to do this would take its own scientific talk. But fundamentally, rather than make judgments on sleep based on a 30-second chunk of EEG data, he began to look at it in 3-second intervals. This led to the development of a table of 10,000 unique 3-second EEG patterns. And he further developed a method of predicting the probability of each of those being in an awake state or a sleep state. And this led then to the development of what we call the sleep depth scale. In the literature, it's cited as the odds ratio product. To be able to get an understanding of how significant this intense ability to analyze the EEG data is to a sleep study, I'm going to show you two versions of the same photograph. This first version uses 72 dpi to portray the image. This next version uses 4 times as much information to give you the image. Isn't the clarity of the second one just remarkable in comparison to the first one? So rather than guess that the first image might have been an apple or a radish, with a bit more information, you can now see clearly that it's a beautiful rose hip. So Dr. Yunus used a similar approach in developing a methodology of looking at the EEG data. So by adding the additional information, it provides so much more clarity to a sleep study. The sleep doesn't change, it's just now we can see it with much more information. Excuse me, this is actually considered a big game changer in our sleep world. Once the research team had completed the sleep depth scale, they then turned their attention to developing technology that could allow brain activity to be collected in the home. And after a relatively short period of time, they developed this wireless device that when connected to this multi-electrode EEG pad, gets positioned on the forehead. It then, using Bluetooth technology, throughout the entire night, sends its information to this unit that sits on a table beside the bedside. In the morning, that unit sends the information up to the cloud, and using the automated scoring system, produces two reports. One, the comprehensive report that I showed you before, that a sleep doctor would be interested in, and also a summary report, and both include the new sleep depth scale. This is when it really became possible, and we began to see the reality that we might be able to put real sleep information into the hands of average people. So the work we've got left to do is we need to write software that will allow this device to receive information, transmit it to the cloud, and then have a report presented to you when you wake up in the morning. There's really two essential pieces that contribute to what we call restorative sleep. And that's the amount of sleep we get and the depth of that sleep. Our research team's currently trying to understand the interplay or the contribution that each of those make to that restorative sleep. And at the end of the day, we think it's the restorative sleep that the average individual is looking to do. Once we understand this, we actually believe that we're going to be able to distill down sleep quality into one number that's representative of restorative sleep. And we're going to be calling it the Restorative Sleep Index. We believe that depth of sleep is going to be very individual, but we're likely going to be able to put sleepers into one of three categories. The first category, and you all know them, you probably love to hate them, these are the people that can get really deep sleep and maintain that through the whole night, and maybe only need 4 or 5 hours to be restored in the morning. The second group are people that are going to have to work on improving both the depth of their sleep and the amount of sleep they get in order to improve their restorative sleep index. And then there's another group that, for whatever reason, just can't improve their depth of sleep, and thus they're going to have to focus on the amount of sleep they get in order to improve their restorative sleep index. Just imagine what might be possible if we could put real, understandable sleep information in the hands of average people every morning. And then, as we begin to amass huge amounts of sleep information, and with the power of big data analytics, how quickly we might unlock the mysteries of sleep and ultimately take back the night. Thank you.